The house had never sounded this loud before, not with voices, not with laughter, but with silence, the kind that settles into the walls and presses against your chest until breathing feels like a conscious effort. I remember standing in the doorway of our bedroom, my hand resting against the frame as if the wood itself could steady me, and thinking that everything inside that room still belonged to him, his watch on the nightstand, his glasses folded neatly beside it, the faint indentation on his pillow, as if he had only stepped away for a moment and might return if I just waited long enough. But he wasn't coming back, and that truth didn't crash into me all at once. It seeped in slowly, like cold water under a locked door, quiet, persistent, unavoidable. I had loved my husband for 42 years. 42 years of shared mornings, quiet arguments, late-night laughter, and the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. He had been steady where I was emotional, patient where I was impulsive. He was the one who remembered where we kept important papers, who read contracts carefully, who always said, "We plan ahead so we don't suffer later." Now he was gone. The funeral had come and gone in a blur of black clothing and soft condolences. People had hugged me, whispered things about strength and time and healing. I nodded through all of it because that's what you're supposed to do. You perform grief in public while trying not to drown in it privately. Through all of it, my son stayed close, Daniel, my only child. He had taken charge in a way that at first felt comforting. He handled calls, spoke to relatives, coordinated things I didn't have the strength to even think about. When people asked me questions, he would gently step in, saying, "Don't worry, Mom, I've got it." I believed him, because I needed to. Grief makes you reach for stability, and Daniel felt like the last solid thing left in a world that had suddenly tilted off its axis. I trusted him not just because he was my son, but because he was part of my husband. A piece of the man I had built my life with, or at least that's what I told myself. The first crack didn't come like a loud break. It came quietly, subtly, almost politely. It was 3 days after the funeral when Daniel sat me down at the dining table, the same table where his father used to spread out paperwork, tapping the surface thoughtfully as he explained things to me in that calm, careful way of his. Daniel had papers in his hands, legal documents. I remember the way my stomach tightened, even before he said a word. "We should go through Dad's will," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "It's better to handle things sooner rather than later. Sooner rather than later." My husband would have said that, but something about the way Daniel said it felt different. Less patient, less grounded, more urgent. Still, I nodded, because I trusted him, because I didn't want to believe there was any reason not to. He laid the documents out in front of me, smoothing them carefully, aligning the edges with an attention to detail that almost looked like his father's, but not quite. There was a stiffness to it, a kind of performance as if he were trying to imitate something he didn't fully understand. "This is the finalized version," he said. "Dad updated it not long ago." I blinked slowly. "Updated?" I asked, my voice quieter than I expected. He nodded. "Yeah, it makes things simpler." That word echoed strangely in my head. My husband had never described something important as simple. He believed in clarity, not convenience. He used to say that anything worth protecting deserved attention, detail, and care. I glanced down at the papers. My name was there. Of course it was. But not in the way I expected. According to what I was reading, most of the estate, our home included, would be transferred under Daniel's control, with provisions that ensured I could remain living there comfortably under his management. The phrase felt foreign, unfamiliar, wrong. I frowned slightly, tracing the line with my finger as if reading it again might somehow change what it said. "I don't remember your father ever mentioning this," I said slowly. Daniel didn't hesitate. "He didn't want to worry you," he replied. "You know how he was." I did know how he was, and that was exactly the problem, because my husband didn't keep important decisions from me, not like this, not ever. A small, almost imperceptible discomfort settled in my chest. But grief has a way of silencing doubt. It tells you that confusion is just part of the pain, that questions are selfish. That trust is easier than confrontation, so I nodded again, even though something inside me had already begun to stir. "I suppose if that's what he wanted," I said softly. Daniel reached across the table, placing his hand over mine. "It is," he said. "And I'll take care of everything. You don't have to worry about a thing." His hand felt warm, reassuring, familiar, and yet there was something in his eyes that didn't match his words. I couldn't name it then, but I felt it. A flicker of something I had never seen in him before. Not grief, not love, something else, something sharper, something controlled. I looked back down at the papers, trying to ignore the unease curling at the edges of my thoughts. Maybe it was just the shock. Maybe it was just the loss. Maybe I was imagining things because the world no longer made sense without my husband in it. But as Daniel began explaining the next steps, signatures, timelines, responsibilities, I noticed something else. He moved quickly, too quickly, as if slowing down might give me time to think. And for the first time since my husband died, I wondered if that was exactly what he was afraid of. The moment everything changed didn't feel dramatic. There was no loud realization, no sudden gasp, no cinematic clarity. It was quiet, almost accidental. And yet, looking back, I think it was the first moment I stopped being a grieving wife and started becoming something else entirely, someone who was paying attention. It happened a week after Daniel showed me the will. By then, the house had begun to feel different. Not just empty, but rearranged in ways that didn't involve furniture. Subtle shifts, invisible ones. The kind that live in tone, in pauses, in the way someone starts speaking for you instead of to you. Daniel had started making decisions without asking. Small ones at first, calling the bank, organizing paperwork, speaking to people on my behalf. Each time he would say the same thing. "I'm just trying to make this easier for you." That word again. But nothing about this felt easy. It felt controlled. I remember standing in my husband's study that morning, my fingers brushing along the edge of his desk. It still smelled like him, paper, ink, and that faint trace of aftershave he had used for decades. The scent hit me harder than I expected, pulling me into a memory so vivid it almost hurt. He was sitting there, reading. Glasses low on his nose, tapping the paper lightly with his finger. "Always read twice," he had said once without looking up. "And if something feels off the first time, it's usually worse the second." The time I had laughed, now standing in that same room I didn't, because something did feel off. And for the first time, I wasn't pushing that feeling away. I walked toward the bookshelf slowly, not entirely sure what I was looking for. Maybe nothing, maybe just him. Some trace of certainty in a world that had begun to feel carefully rewritten. My eyes landed on a small, worn folder tucked between two books. It didn't belong there. My husband was meticulous. Papers had places. Files had systems. He didn't tuck things randomly, which meant this wasn't random. My hand hesitated for just a second before pulling it out. The folder was thinner than I expected. Older, too. The edges slightly bent, like it had been opened and closed more times than most. My heart began to beat faster, not from fear, from something sharper, recognition. I opened it slowly. And the world quiet as it had been shifted again, because the document inside wasn't the one Daniel had shown me. At first glance, it looked similar. Same structure, same names, same formal language. But as my eyes moved down the page, line by line, the differences became impossible to ignore. This version didn't place Daniel in control. It didn't reduce me to a dependent presence in my own home. It didn't hand over authority under the disguise of simplification. This version was clear, direct, unmistakable. Everything remained in my name, full ownership, full control. With Daniel listed not as a manager, but as a beneficiary to receive his share after my passing. Exactly as my husband would have wanted, exactly as we had discussed. Years ago, in conversations I suddenly realized I remembered with terrifying clarity. I felt my knees weaken slightly, and I had to steady myself against the desk. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, not because I was confused, but because I wasn't. This wasn't uncertainty anymore, this was truth, and truth has a weight to it that grief never quite prepares you for. I sat down slowly in his chair, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. There were signatures, dates, witness names, everything aligned, everything real, which meant the version Daniel had shown me wasn't just different, it was wrong. Deliberately wrong. And that realization didn't break me. It didn't send me into tears or panic or disbelief. It did something far more dangerous. It cleared my mind. In a single, quiet moment, grief stepped back, and awareness stepped forward. I read the document again, then again. Each time, the same conclusion settled deeper into my chest, not as a question, but as a fact. My son had lied to me not by accident, not by misunderstanding, but by design. And suddenly, everything else began to rearrange itself around that truth, his urgency, his tone, the way he guided conversations, the missing explanations, the careful framing of what Dad wanted. Wasn't care, it was control. And I had almost accepted it. That thought hit me harder than anything else, not just what he had done, but how close I had come to letting him do it. I closed my eyes for a moment, gripping the paper tightly. There was a time, not long ago, when I would have confronted him immediately, demanded answers. searched his face for some version of the boy I had raised. But that version of me was still grieving, still trusting, still hopping. This version of me was thinking carefully, quietly. And for the first time since my husband died, I understood something he had always tried to teach me. Not everything is solved with emotion. Some things require patience, strategy, timing. I opened my eyes again, looking down at the document with a steadiness I hadn't felt in weeks. If this was the real will, then Daniel had made a mistake, a critical one, because deception only works when the truth stays hidden. And now it wasn't. I slipped the document back into the folder, but I didn't return it to the shelf, not yet. Instead, I held it in my hands, feeling its weight, its reality, its quiet power. This wasn't just paper. It was leverage. It was clarity. It was the line between what he wanted me to believe and what actually was. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was preparing for it.